They said she was just another pair of hands with a toolkit, a mind clearer with nothing to offer but patience and tweezers. That's what the captain muttered one late evening, loud enough for her to hear, as she walked alone back from the training field. She's not a soldier, she's a technician. Put her on the dirt, and she'll stay there. Some people are made for front lines. She isn't one of them. Elena Varga didn't argue. She didn't remind him she'd disarmed more live ordnance in her 20s than most men would in their entire careers. She didn't explain the notes she kept in that battered green book tucked under her arm, or the way she mapped every shift in the soil, every mark in the wire, every silence between the wind gusts. She simply kept walking, boots heavy with dust, eyes steady, mind alive with patterns only she seemed to notice. And weeks later, when that notebook was opened on the long oak table of the Strategy Council, when her code name was spoken aloud for the first time in public, Vortex Dusk, every sneer, every dismissal, would vanish like smoke in the rain. But that wasn't then. That was later. This is the story of how it began. Before we dive in, let me pause. Because if you believe that respect should never come from titles or stripes, but from the quiet courage of people who keep showing up even when no one notices, then like and subscribe, because you're going to want this story remembered. Elena was 28, though her eyes looked older. Not in the way of wrinkles or lines, but in the weight of someone who had learned to be comfortable with silence and with danger. She was stationed at Marrow Field, a training ground more forgotten than remembered, a flat stretch of dirt and weeds used for war games, clearance drills, and the occasional test of new surveillance drones. To most, it was just a place for practice, a backdrop for bravado, where officers barked orders and cadets jogged circles until their boots wore thin. To Elena, it was something else. It was alive. Every morning before the sun cracked the horizon, she walked the perimeter, her notebook in hand, recording details no one had asked for. The angle of rust on a half-buried casing, the shift in soil after rain, the faint scarring of boot prints in places where no drills had been scheduled. She saw meaning in what others dismissed as dirt and debris. It wasn't paranoia. It was discipline, born from years of kneeling in silence with nothing but a probe and the knowledge that one wrong breath could end everything. But no one saluted her in the mess hall. No one saved her a seat. At 28, she was younger than most of the men who mocked her and older than the cadets who ignored her. She occupied a space in between, invisible, tolerated but not respected. A specialist, yes, but the mind girl, they called her, with a half-smirk, as though the title itself was a punchline. There was one officer in particular, Lieutenant Grayson, who had made her into a running joke. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who strutted instead of walked. His laughter always arrived first, loud and sharp, the kind meant to gather a crowd. "Careful with your toys, Varga," he'd call across the yard. "Wouldn't want you to chip a nail." The others would laugh, relieved the ridicule wasn't aimed at them. Elena never flinched, never looked up, just kept writing in that green notebook, one line after another. But what she wrote wasn't for them. It was for later, for the silence of her quarters at night, where she would spread maps across the narrow desk and begin to connect dots no one else even knew existed. Because she had noticed something, a pattern in the mines left from last year's exercises, the way their placements aligned not by chance, but by intention. Mines didn't just fall in grids. They fell in codes. And the one forming at Marrow Field spelled something no one had yet seen. It wasn't words written in ink. It was geometry, placement, spacing, intervals. She traced it with her pencil one night, tapping the eraser against her lips as the lines intersected into two unmistakable words. Vortex Dusk. She stared at the page for a long time, unsure if she'd conjured it out of exhaustion or paranoia. But the more she checked, the clearer it became. Someone had embedded a message in the earth itself, and she was the only one who could read it. The next morning, she mentioned it to Grayson while tightening the straps on her vest. "These placements, they're deliberate. Not training scatter. It looks like coordinates." He snorted. "Or maybe you've been staring at dirt too long. Mines don't spell riddles, Varga. They explode. Leave the strategy to people who actually fight." She didn't reply. She just zipped her vest, shouldered her pack, and walked past him toward the field, her boots clicking steady against the gravel. Alone, she knelt in the soil. Her gloves brushed dirt from the casing of an old mine left for training. She disarmed it with calm precision, Not because it was dangerous. Its charge had been removed months ago, but because she respected the ritual. And when the final wire came loose, when the casing lifted, she found what she had been looking for. Not a standard army trigger. Not the parts they used in practice. This was something else. Foreign, unfamiliar, stamped with a manufacturer's mark she had only seen once, years ago, in a classified briefing about weapons that weren't supposed to exist on domestic soil. Her heart didn't race. She didn't panic. She simply noted it down. Another line in her green book. Non-standard trigger. Origin, Calvern Systems. Placement deliberate. Confirm Vortex Dusk. By evening, the mess hall was loud again, laughter ringing out over trays of half-warm food. Elena sat in the corner, silent, a sandwich in one hand and her notebook in the other. Around her, cadets jostled and shouted, officers bragged, and Lieutenant Grayson slammed his hand on the table mid-joke. No one noticed the girl in the corner writing down the silence. They wouldn't notice until much later, when the alarms rang, when the council gathered, when commanders whispered her code name as though it had always belonged to her. But for now, she remained invisible. The mine girl, the technician, the quiet one no one listened to. And still, every night, she wrote. She mapped. She connected the dots. Because Elena Varga wasn't just disarming mines. She was unearthing a message buried beneath them, a warning no one wanted to believe. And when the call finally came, when the radio crackled with a voice she'd never heard before, a voice that said, Vortex Dusk, report immediately. The Strategy Council needs you. The world would realize too late that the quiet girl in the dirt had been holding the map all along. But that moment was still to come. For now, under the dim light of her quarters, she turned another page in her notebook and drew the next line in silence. The thing about silence is that most people run from it. They fill it with chatter, with bravado, with noise that makes them feel alive. But Elena Varga lived in silence the way others lived in cities. It wasn't emptiness to her. It was information. Every pause between the wind and the hum of power lines. Every scrape of boot against gravel that shouldn't have been there. Silence was her ally. And silence was telling her something dangerous. The mines around Marrow Field were supposed to be leftovers, inert shells scattered years ago for practice. But Elena knew better. She had disarmed too many live ones in her short career to be fooled by carelessness. These weren't leftovers. They were markers, a language no one else cared enough to read. By the end of September, her notebook was thick with sketches, grids, angles, soil measurements. Alone in her quarters, she traced the patterns until her pencil snapped, then sharpened it again, her focus unbroken. Every line led back to those two words etched across the earth itself, Vortex Dusk. She whispered them once in the dark, testing how they felt on her tongue. The sound was unsettling, almost like a call sign from another world. But it fit. When she mentioned it again to Lieutenant Grayson during a break in drills, he rolled his eyes so hard the cadets nearby laughed before he even opened his mouth. Vortex Dusk? What is that? Varga, a rock band. Mines don't spell poems. Maybe put the notebook away and grab a rifle. You might learn something useful. The cadets snickered. Elena only shrugged and returned to tightening the strap on her helmet. She'd stopped expecting them to listen a long time ago. That afternoon, a storm rolled over the field. The rain came sideways, drumming against metal rooftops, turning dirt into muck. Most of the base huddled in the mess hall or the officers' lounge, playing cards, telling stories louder than the thunder. Elena pulled her poncho tighter, flashlight in hand, and walked the perimeter alone. Her boots sank into the mud with every step, water splashing up her legs. But she pressed on, because silence sounded different in the rain. And tonight, the silence was broken. Near the southeastern culvert, where water poured heavy into the drainage ditch, she found them. Footprints. Not military boots, not standard issue. The tread was wrong, too shallow, the stride uneven. And they were fresh. She crouched low, flashlight beam tight, tracing them to the edge of the culvert. They disappeared into the drainage pipe, swallowed by darkness. Her hand hovered over her radio. Protocol said report it immediately, but something in her gut told her not to, not yet. If she handed this over to Grayson or the others, it would be dismissed, mocked, lost in the noise of poker games and laughter. She needed proof, something undeniable. So she followed the prints herself. The pipe was narrow, the air damp and metallic. Water pooled at her knees, soaking through her fatigues. Every sound echoed. She moved slowly, methodically, flashlight catching the faint shimmer of something metallic lodged against the wall. She reached out and froze. It wasn't debris. It was a trigger, a foreign-made device wired carefully into the structure, set not for blast but for surveillance. A sensor. Watching. Recording. Waiting. Her breath caught in her throat. She had seen this before, once, years ago, in a briefing about advanced infiltration tactics. They called them ghost triggers, devices meant not to kill, but to measure response times, gather intel, mark weak points. Which meant whoever planted it hadn't finished. They were planning something bigger. She disarmed it carefully, sliding the casing into a pouch, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. Then she pulled out her notebook, jotting down every detail, every wire, every angle. By the time she crawled back out into the rain, her hair plastered to her forehead, mud caked on her gloves, she knew one thing for certain. Marrow Field wasn't just a training ground anymore. It was a target. The next morning, she tried again to raise the alarm. This time she went straight to the base security office, laying the device on the table in front of the duty sergeant. He frowned, turned it over once, then shrugged. Probably just old parts left behind by contractors. Not our problem. You overthink things, specialist. She wanted to scream, to slam her notebook down and force them to read every line she'd written. But instead, she nodded silently, retrieved the device, and walked out. Arguing wouldn't help. Not here. That night, she sat in her quarters, the rain replaced by an eerie stillness outside. She flipped open her notebook, pages damp from the storm. The words stared back at her. Vortex Dusk. She underlined them twice, then added a single sentence below. This is not training. This is preparation. And she wasn't wrong. 3 nights later, at precisely 2:17, the base went dark. Every light, every camera, every generator, all cut at once. Total blackout. The silence was suffocating. Some cadets thought it was a storm. Others thought it was a drill. But Elena knew instantly. This was the breach she had been mapping. While Lieutenant Grayson shouted orders into dead radios, stumbling in the dark, Elena was already moving, notebook in one hand, flashlight in the other. She retraced her steps to the southeastern culvert, heart pounding, rain-soaked soil clinging to her boots. And there they were. Footprints again, 2 sets this time, deeper, faster. Moving with precision, not panic. She crouched low, tracing the line of the fence with her light. A latch hung broken, wires cut clean, the blind spot she had reported weeks ago now yawning wide. They had come and gone without a sound. By the time the backup generators sputtered to life, the intruders were long gone. Grayson stormed into the control room, barking for reports, demanding answers, his voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. But when Elena walked in, soaked and silent, she didn't raise her voice. She simply placed her notebook on the console and opened it to a page already filled with times, coordinates, and breach patterns. You were warned, she said softly. You chose not to listen. The room went quiet. For the first time, even Grayson had no joke ready. Outside, the base returned to its routine. Cadets drilled. Officers barked. But whispers spread faster than orders. Elena Varga wasn't just the mine girl anymore. She was the one who had seen it coming. The one with the notebook. The one who walked alone in the rain and came back with truths no one wanted, but everyone needed. And though they didn't know it yet, the call was already on its way. A voice from beyond the base, from beyond Grayson, from beyond anyone who had ever dismissed her. A voice that would change everything. It would arrive on the radio before dawn, for words that would end her invisibility forever. Vortex Dusk, report immediately. The radio crackled just before dawn. Static first, sharp and jagged, cutting through the heavy quiet of Marrow Field. Then a voice, calm, steady, commanding. Specialist Elena Varga. Report immediately. This is Commander Holt. Strategy Council needs you. Code name Vortex Dusk. The words didn't just cut the silence. They shattered it. In the security office, half the staff froze mid-motion. Lieutenant Grayson, still hunched over reports he didn't understand, lifted his head as if the ceiling itself had spoken. Vortex Dusk? His eyes darted around the room, searching for an explanation. But there was only one person standing still, notebook in hand, her face unreadable. Elena. For a moment, No one moved. Then the radio hissed again. Do not delay. Transport en route. Repeat. Vortex Dusk. Council requires your presence. The color drained from Grayson's face. He turned toward her, mouth opening, but no sound came. He had mocked her for weeks, dismissed her warnings, laughed at her silence. Now, the highest authority in the chain of command had spoken her code name as though it had been carved in stone. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or raise her chin. She simply closed her notebook, tucked it under her arm, and walked past him, her boots striking the floor with a rhythm that sounded different now. Not invisible anymore. Inevitable. By the time the black convoy arrived, the entire base was watching. 3 vehicles, windows tinted, engines humming low but heavy. The doors opened in unison, and out stepped officers in full dress uniform. At the center of them, a tall figure in a dark coat, silver hair glinting in the pale light, Commander Holt. Every cadet straightened instinctively. Grayson stumbled to attention, his salute shaky, sweat still clinging to his brow. Holt ignored him. His eyes swept the crowd once, then landed on Elena. Without hesitation, he extended a folder, thick and sealed. Specialist Varga, he said, voice calm but resonant. Your work has been reviewed. The patterns you mapped match encrypted infiltration protocols we've been tracking for months. You saw it when no one else did. He opened the folder, laying out sheets of her own sketches copied and stamped with council seals. Her notebook, copied, scanned, validated at the highest level. Grayson's lips parted, but no words came. The cadets behind him shifted, subtly uneasy. The mine girl, the one they had laughed at, now stood shoulder to shoulder with the commander. Holt continued. Effective immediately, you are to accompany me to the Strategy Council. Code Vortex Dusk has been activated. You'll brief senior command yourself. The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Holt gestured toward the convoy. Come. Elena didn't look back as she stepped forward. She didn't need to. She knew the stares that followed, the weight of every whisper, every regret. Her boots struck the gravel like a verdict. She climbed into the convoy, her green notebook still tucked under her arm, and the doors closed. The ride was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound. Elena sat straight, gaze fixed on the horizon, while officers beside her stole sidelong glances as though trying to memorize her. She ignored them. Her mind replayed every step in the mud, every footprint by the culvert, every word she'd written in silence. This was no longer about proving herself. This was about the map. And the message buried in the mines was only the beginning. When they arrived at the council compound, the air itself seemed heavier. A vast hall, walls lined with banners and maps. Long oak tables where men and women in uniforms and suits sat waiting. Generals, intelligence directors, strategists, all of them staring at her as she entered. Commander Holt didn't introduce her as a specialist. He didn't call her technician, rookie, or mine girl. He placed her notebook on the table and said simply, Council, this is Vortex Dusk. Her code name echoed through the chamber like a drumbeat. A general leaned forward, tapping a finger against one of her sketches. You mapped this without access to satellite imaging. Elena nodded. Just the soil, the angles, and time. The general exchanged a glance with another officer, their faces shifting from skepticism to respect. Another leaned back, arms crossed. Your placement analysis here. This shows a larger formation. Not just a breach. It's a message. They're marking staging zones for infiltration. And if this timing is correct, he trailed off, eyes narrowing at the implications. The room filled with murmurs. Elena stood silently, hands clasped behind her back, waiting. She didn't raise her voice to demand attention. She didn't need to. The silence spoke for her. Finally, Commander Holt turned to her. Specialist Varga, no, Vortex Dusk, you'll lead the clearance directive. Your notebook is now doctrine. Every field team will operate on your grid. The weight of the moment pressed heavy against the chamber. Elena inhaled quietly, steadying herself. She wasn't just the one who had seen what others ignored. She was now the one writing the map they all would follow. And still, she said nothing. Just nodded once, calm and certain. That evening, back at Marrow Field, the story had already spread. Cadets whispered her code, name like contraband. Officers muttered in the mess hall, their voices hushed. Grayson sat alone, staring at a page from her notebook someone had copied and passed around like scripture. For years to come, They would tell the story of the quiet specialist who walked alone in the rain, who listened to the silence others laughed at, who saw the map no one else believed existed. And they would remember the moment the council called her not Elena, not Varga, not Mine Girl, but Vortex Dusk, the name that silenced the laughter, shifted the war, and proved once again that sometimes the ones who walk slow, who kneel in the dirt, who listen before they speak, are the ones who see farther than anyone else.